I should begin by introducing that I'm speaking with William Paul Young, author of The Shack and soon to be released Crossroads. Um, and I'm working on a thesis regarding The Shack and the Screwtape Letters. And
it's so cool to hear that in the same sentence. That is so funny.
Oh, well, there will be 30 pages of it.
Well, that's awesome.
Where they're concurrent. I know that I have listened to many of the interviews that you have done that are online, and read a number of things, and I am not sure where I remember hearing this at this stage of the game, but I do remember that I believe you had mentioned that C.S. Lewis was a favorite author of yours.
Yeah, it's in the acknowledgments in The Shack, so
okay,
maybe that's where I first heard it.
What would you say that it was about his writing that influenced you?
Well, one, I love fiction anyway, and so Lewis he runs this line between being an intellectual rationalist and a mystic, and the mystic part comes in his creative writing, as well as it does in some of his nonfiction. He just tends to go into a little deeper space, and I've always been a voracious reader. But most of what I read was secular, and then I ran into, George MacDonald, and who's the Scotsman that had such an influence on Lewis, and I ran into the Inklings and Tolkien, of course, and then Madeleine L'Engle, I would consider to be a phenomenally gifted. And Lewis, he's intelligent and pushes the boundaries. At least he creates space, and that's what attracts me to good writing, is that it actually creates space for others to be inside, as opposed to even Lewis, when he writes nonfiction. A lot of times the purpose is to reduce space so that we can understand each other, or you can be convinced by my position or whatever. And good fiction to me actually opens up space so that to me the Holy Spirit is allowed to speak to me that connects with me. It's just like when people read The Shack and they go, "This piece really affected me. Did you mean that when you wrote it?" And sometimes I go, "No." But a picture, just like a picture on the wall, or music, a way of not defining where all the edges are. And so you tend to have more ability to be inside that space. And I think Lewis does that terribly. I love science fiction, and his science fiction trilogy, especially Perelandra, just this huge impact on me. Loved The Great Divorce. Loved Screwtape Letters. And he just took a lot of risks that a lot of other people didn't. Charles Williams would be another one that's inside that group of writers. It's just intelligent art.
In the Shack and the Screwtape Letters, the premise for both stories revolves around a spiritual correspondence.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Screwtape Letters, there's the academic approach to correspondence between the demons, which maintains a certain distance. Whereas in The Shack, the character of Mac receives an invitation from God to return to the place that is representative of his pain.
Yeah.
Why a letter?
Made more sense to me than a phone call. When you're working with fiction, you're allowed to do all kinds of things that you normally wouldn't do. I mean, that is, it's not like I am trying to do to communicate some argument. So what I want to do is establish a connection between Mackenzie and uh, God, and yet it's enough of a an unusual situation because I believe there's a God who's good all the time, involved in the details of our lives. And I think we get these kinds of invitations all the time, not in that kind of an objective sense necessarily, but through other people, through listening to a particular song, these interconnectivities that exist. And all I did was incarnated that kind of communication into a physical form, which was a letter. And, I think Lewis probably was thinking along similar lines in that it just gave him a vehicle for contact. And, but, God speaks to us in many, many different ways. And, and I'm writing this for my kids. And so they're going to think it's cool. But the note is just a tangible sense of what happens so much in our lives in terms of the ways that God finds, the means that God finds to communicate to our hearts. Coincidence has a name, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was one of those things when you said that it made a lot more sense than a phone call. I was going to give you a whole selection of things. It could have been carrier pigeon.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it could be.
Email.
And, but it was in the middle of winter. It was an interruption. And I think a lot of times we get a lot of different communications, and God knows we're not going to listen to a lot of them, but He sends them anyway because that's what love does. And and Lewis is looking at it from an academic point of view. I really like what he did in that because you get to look over the person's shoulder in Screwtape Letters and listen to this dialogue that happens between characters. Well, you're looking over Mackenzie's shoulder, and Mackenzie's sort of everyman, and so there's something in us that says, I would like something objective like that I could take to my group of agnostic friends and say, see, I got a letter, and so it bridges that gap that we have. We don't want to trust our hearts. We want something objective. And where Mackenzie's at, he needs something. He needs a connection point. And I think that kind of mystery happens to us all the time. We just are oblivious to it a lot of times. We become adults, right? We've replaced wonder for words like chance and coincidence and luck and fate.
But he needed something tangible. Creating the personification of the Trinity in the shack has received a lot of attention, and even there have been some criticisms. In breaking down iconic notions of religiosity, how did you come up with the incarnation of Papa as a heavy-set Black woman?
Yep. Well, I come from a religious background. I'm a missionary kid, Protestant, evangelical, fundamental, and grew up in the highlands of New Guinea. My father was an itinerant preacher for years. So I understand that world. And so my imagery related to God was very Western, very male, very white, Gandalf with an attitude. It was Plato's God watching from the infinite distance of a disapproving heart. And that's why in the shack, when Mackenzie goes back to it, God doesn't show up.